divide my talk, time permitting, into sort of two subjects. One is the facts about Ned and rediscovering the headstone. And the other, which since I'm not a professional historian, it's not a major part of our committee work, is sort of the why and what I've learned about the importance of doing work like this. So I'm going to start briefly with on the subject of why and then move into the facts and, time permitting, go back to some comments about history. So facts are the basis of history, and truthfulness is a measurement of facts. However, facts and truth are not history's goals. If that were the case, it would be a social science like sociology or anthropology. But history is taught as a subject of the humanities because its goal is an empathetic understanding of others who lived in either a time or a place separate from us. History is also the creation of contemporary documents and artifacts that transmit understanding to others, transmit to not only our own society, but also to those who are now separated from us by geography, or in the future will be separated by both time and place. So before I can return to that subject, which is the kind of philosophy I like to talk about, and moral philosophy, and as well as its relation to the arts, let me do a few facts. This is the cover, this sort of began it. We were tasked in 2007 by the town board to take a look at all the small cemeteries in town, because so many of them, there's maybe 30 or so, that are on preserved land. You're walking through the woods, you'll find a cemetery for one person, or 3 or 5, and there's some larger ones, and the town owns many of them. The few are still owned by families who take care of them. Next slide, please. And the next slide, what we're going to see is one of the other African American headstones that was vaguely known, but thanks to the work of the committee and some people became much more known. This is Thomas Jefferson Davis. He was a Civil War veteran. He was born, I think, 1828. He made it just barely into the 20th century. And, oops, it was going fast. Okay, so now we're up to Ned. We're going very fast. They're moving me along here. So what you didn't see was the page that said that Ned's, where Ned was missing, and luckily, all the things that said in there that they were built over, like Sandra was saying, that they thought turned out not to be true. And so we can go to the next and show that we succeeded and found, and I don't know if Russ Calemo, is he here? Did he show up? No. So one of our members just wouldn't give up, and he walked up and down the street and he made friends with everybody and got people to trust him, and because people were nervous. I mean, if the people who knew that there was a headstone were nervous about talking about it, and finally developed enough trust that we found out that yes, the cemetery had been taken down. We don't know how many generations of a homeowner before, but that the gravestone existed. And of course that was thrilling. We still didn't know anything more than what was essentially on the headstone that said a Negro manservant of Jeremiah Osborne, and we knew he died. It was August 8th, 1817. But we didn't really know anything else. And poor Russ spent, days inside of the vaults at the Suffolk County Record Bureau in Riverhead looking for deed transfers, things like that, and wasn't coming up with much. Next slide, please. But about 2 weeks before we had already scheduled the ceremony, Steve Borner, who works at the Long Island Collection at the East Hampton Library, and Russ found the authentic deed where Captain Jeremiah Osborne transferred to Ned a half-acre of land in 1804, and now all of a sudden history opens up. He refers to Ned as a free man, so we know that at some time before 1804 he was freed. There's no price filled in, probably a gift. It also starts to give you some idea of Captain Osborne. You see the neighbors. The neighbors are two very prominent families, the Dominies and the Bakers. This is an area that later became called Freetown. most likely, we generally believe, because of the large number of freed slaves who ended up there. But at that point in time, it was called Sandy Hook. So very likely Ned was one of the first people who, first black person, African American, who showed up in that area, especially when you look at who the neighbors were. And of course, it also finally allowed us to decide he was probably buried on the land that he worked and owned. So that, of course, was quite wonderful. And so next slide, please. Now, this is a favorite slide. You get to see Georgette in action. And she's quite a dynamo. You can see she's gotten our supervisor, Mr. Campbell, clapping his hands and smiling, and everybody. But it was really moving. It was the right thing to do. This is at the ceremony. That's Russ in the plaid shirt in front. This gets back a little bit to what I was saying about history and transmission of history. It was emotional but a little intellectual until Georgette finally got up there and she made us all sing. And all of a sudden you felt the importance of the event. You felt this communication of some spirit, of some sense of why we're all here together. And I felt it really made the whole event and started forming some of my ideas. This is I don't want to say precisely where it is, but let's say it's in between the lower portion triangle of 3 Mile Harbor and Springs Fireplace Road. Okay, near where the Calvary Baptist Church is now, down on Springs Fireplace Road. And next slide, please. So now there was this sort of Ned mania, and it shows things get around. And then a few weeks ago, Roseanne Behrens, the wife, I think, of Richard Behrens in the Historical Society, was going through trustee documents looking for something, but not anything to do with Ned, and starts to see this name Ned all over the place from 1780. Well, once a year, basically, seeing it. And it turns out, as you see in the sort of right-hand page, that Ned was rather special, that we knew nothing about this, that Ned rang the bell. He was hired. I just picked one of the pages, but if you take every year from 1780 to 1816, pretty much each time it says, the trustees determined to hire Ned to ring the bell. This was a very important job. This was the very famous large church near where Guildhall is now, and that was famous on all of Long Island. And he certainly rang the bell for church services, probably funerals, any other meetings that would have happened there. And my belief, the way I read this, is he was definitely allowed to keep the money, even during the period he was a slave. And you see the change where early on he's referred to as Captain Osborne's Ned, to later on he's referred to as Ned Negro. Only once did I ever see him, unfortunately, referred to as Ned. And then early on he's paid in shillings, and by 1816 he's paid 15, he's paid in dollars. So these are the kind of things that open up, and it also starts to give you a sense of the life of what happened and the importance, even during this period of slavery and afterwards, of his importance to the community. Next slide, please. We'll move on fast through the... This is just, again, you keep finding more things. It's in the lobby. You can read this. It's a document I found on the internet that somebody went through 200 wills and similar documents on the East End from 1680 to, whatever it says, 18-something, and 17, yeah. And it's a very, if you download it, it's really worth reading, but it's very sad because page after page, there's several pages that said, you know, and I give Peggy to my grandchild, and I give a John to my son, and I give, and it's just numbing by the time you start getting into 3 or 4 pages of this. But I reproduced some of the pages and a wonderful conclusion these people wrote. It's in the lobby. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, and we'll rest here a little bit. So this is Ned, and I'll try, and I'm probably over my time, but I'll try to go very fast and talk a little bit, just quickly, as I said, why I think it's sort of, this is really a humanistic endeavor and not just about facts. And to me, and each person will have their own ways of creating a story. I'm a musician, I'm an amateur but a very serious pianist, and to me the gravestones, I work through a cemetery, it's like seeing notes on a score. And I also think of interpreting music. It isn't, you know, you hear people play a piece of music and they get every note right and you say it wasn't even worthwhile to spend the time listening. And this is where I get into, I believe that it isn't just about getting the facts right, that there's a real importance to the interpretive side, to the arts of rhetoric and communication that will then, and also bringing first the understanding into you so that then you can bring the understanding out to others. And part of that, what finally I think hit home to me, that I hadn't really thought about before, was, especially as a young person, I hadn't thought about. But I got my Medicare card 1.5 years ago, so I think myself differently now. Is that we're not the end point of history. That you tend to think, you know, well, here we are, we're at the end point of history. No, we're just something in the continuum of history. So it made me start to think about the responsibility of the history that we have going forward. And I know I'm a little off time, I'm going to go very quickly here. This is a book, Discovering the African-American Experience in Suffolk County, 1620-1860. And the Quakers became very active abolitionists. And in 1811, this fellow Elias Hicks wrote, "It will be readily granted by every man of reason and justice whose mind is not biased by the unrighteous and corrupt custom of holding his fellow creatures in bondage, that to steal or take a man by force and subject him to the abject state of a slave for life is a most unrighteous and cruel act that any can be guilty of short of murder." And I sense, when I read that he wasn't just writing to his time, but in a way he was writing to us, he was writing to all posterity. So, you know, so what I think about what we try to do in history is thinking to the future, it's going to look back at us, that we both try to make sure our history is right, and we both try to make sure we all try to make sure our history is righteous. Thank you very much.